Hello, and welcome to an METV special report on animal abuse, abandonment, and neglect. I'm Charles Clapsaddle, Station Manager for Manatee Educational Television, and we are very privileged to have with us today the State Attorney for the 12th Judicial Circuit, Mr. Ed Brodsky, Manatee County Commissioner Carol Whitmore, Assistant State Attorney Lisa Chittaro, Deputy Chief for the Palmetto Police Department, Scott Tyler, and Captain William Fowler from the Bradenton Police Department to discuss the impact of animal abuse, abandonment, and neglect in our community. Thank you all for being here. The State Attorney's Office, under the leadership of Mr. Brodsky, has implemented a white-collar animal abuse division that specializes in prosecuting those that victimize the most vulnerable members of our society. Mr. Brodsky and his team understand the importance of providing a voice to the voiceless and to actively and aggressively prosecute those that commit crimes of abuse, abandonment, and neglect. The State Attorney wants to provide a greater awareness in our community to prevent these crimes from being committed and to very actively support law enforcement during their investigations. Animal abuse, abandonment, and neglect is truly a heinous crime. How prevalent is animal abuse in our community? What can our community do to stop these crimes? And how does law enforcement, our county government, and the State Attorney's Office work together to stop these crimes from occurring? Our panelists today are all working hard to stop animal abuse and to prosecute those that commit those crimes. And in the forefront of all these efforts is our State Attorney, Ed Brodsky. Mr. Brodsky, how prevalent and how serious is animal abuse, abandonment, and neglect in Manatee County?
Well, Mr. Clapsaddle, first let me begin by saying thank you for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here and to join all of you here on what I think is a very important topic to our community. Manatee County has shown and proven that we care about our animals, we love our animals, and it's important to us as a community that we protect our animals. And unfortunately, after we created this unit, making sure that we're going to not only say that we care about our animals in this community, but we're going to strive to protect our animals by vigorously prosecuting those that hurt animals. And unfortunately, after the unit was created, we found that in Manatee County, unfortunately, we have a large volume of cases that we're seeing. There's a lot of animals that are being abused, abandoned, neglected, and so unfortunately for Lisa Chittaro, who is assigned and tasked the responsibility of being our prosecutor here in Manatee County, and with our law enforcement partners here, they've been tasked a very heavy caseload.
Well, when you first implemented this division, Mr. Brodsky, you came together and you created a coalition, and part of that coalition was obviously getting Commissioner Carol Whitmore, to work with you and to outreach to many organizations. So, Commissioner Whitmore, when Mr. Brodsky said we're going to do this, what was your input into trying to help this coalition effectively begin?
Mr. Brodsky and I talked about this probably about 2.5 years ago, and we were trying. We are a compassionate community. We do care about animals, but then we realized that there's another faction of this community that we've got to stop, and that's with the animal abuse. So thanks to Mr. Brodsky's efforts to get the team together, of course Manatee County was going to jump on this. I wanted to let you know who is on this coalition so that the public is aware and that we've gotten a broad spectrum from the community. We have Manatee County Sheriff's Department, Bradenton Police Department, Palmetto Police Department, Holmes Beach Police Department, Dr. Luke Berglund, Dr. Pam Wright. We have the Animal Network, Manatee Animal Services, Bishop Animal Shelter, Canine Castaways, Gene Palin from Holmes Beach City Commission, and myself. And what we've decided and all discussed was there's no better way than us to communicate so that we can address animal abuse. There's no better way for us to be able to stop this unless we educate the public with forums like this. And that's why Manatee County has become involved.
And that's a great coalition to be put together, and I'm sure from the state's attorney's perspective to have that kind of coalition working with you in your efforts is got to be rewarding.
It's been very rewarding, and in fact, I think we're doing everything that we can to increase the community partners. We'd like to involve more community partners. We recently, through the efforts of Commissioner Whitmore and Lisa Chittaro, we've begun a community partnership with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And so we're very proud of that partnership, and they're going to be working very closely with us now in our efforts to end animal abuse.
And we want to talk a little bit about that because that's a very exciting partnership. And we want to talk specifically with Chief Tyler and Captain Fowler about their efforts in investigation. But before we do that, I want to talk to Ms. Chittaro about you're being the tip of the spear. You're the one who actually kind of defines where you go in a prosecution, specifically how it deals with animal abuse, abandonment, and neglect. Can you kind of define for us, if you can, what constitutes abuse? What is that wide spectrum of how you define abuse?
The way to define abuse is, according to the Florida statutes, which is 828.12, misdemeanor, animal cruelty, abuse and neglect. Animal abuse and neglect are basically the same thing. It's covered under the same statute. For a misdemeanor, and I'll just read you from the statute, it is a person who unnecessarily overloads, overdrives, torments, deprives of necessary sustenance or shelter, or unnecessarily mutilates or kills any animal, or causes the same to be done, or carries in or upon a vehicle, or otherwise any animal in a cruel and humane manner. That's the actual statute language. What that means and what case law has defined that statute is that neglect or abuse is more of the minor crimes. And there's a Supreme Court case which kind of spelled it out and gave us some guidance on that. And what it basically said is that if somebody goes away on vacation for a few days and leaves their animal without any food and water, that would be considered a misdemeanor. Now, if that same scenario, you leave that animal alone and there's no food, there's no water, and as a result, that animal suffers some sort of physical problems like muscle loss or malnourishment, that's a little grayer. And that's when it could then become a felony. For a felony, which is animal cruelty, is a third-degree felony. That is, right from the statute, a person who intentionally commits an act to an animal which results in the cruel death or excessive or repeated infliction of an unnecessary pain or suffering or causes the same to be done. And again, case law, which interprets and defines our statute, is that what case law has indicated and said and has made clear is that these types of crimes are what's called general intent crimes, which means a person does not have to intend to go out and hurt or cause injury to an animal. What matters is that someone has either done an act or omitted to do an act, and as a result, it's what's happened to that animal is where that is kind of the tipping point, and that's what determines whether or not you could be subjected to criminal prosecution.
So, for example, if Captain Fowler or Chief Tyler are called out, to investigate, and they see an animal that's been beaten and evidence of being beaten or malnourished or anything, their interpretation of that is through their investigation is to see if that's been done in such a manner with intent. Would that be a fair assumption?
Well, the intent in that would be, and they're the ones who investigate. Our role is to assist law enforcement in investigation, but that is a subordinate role that we take as prosecutors. So they do the investigation, they collect the evidence. When they investigate, and they're probably better to ask, they are the experts at investigating, is the intent issue is that if you kicked a dog, unless you thought, maybe mistakenly you were kicking a garbage can, but the act resulted in harm. That's, I believe, what they would look at, is the intentional act would be that you kicked a dog.
Well, Chief, when you go out and you get a call, and Captain Fowler, the same question, when you get a call and you said, this dog is being maltreated, what do you look for as part of your investigation to report?
Well, as far as deciding whether this is a misdemeanor crime or a felony crime, I think first of all, have you done something deliberately to hurt the animal? As opposed to what we're talking about where you maybe do some other act, and in the process of that act, the animal also becomes injured. If you go out of your way to hurt an animal, you go out of your way to, whack a pet with a stick or, kick it repeatedly or something like that, I think that's going to be more, we're going to be looking at investigating more felony crime there. The other thing is going to be, aggravating factors. Is the animal abused or neglected? Is it suffering ill health concerns? But if this is a deliberate, repeated an act or some neglect that's going on for an extended period of time where the animal's suffering irreparable health consequences, some sort of irreparable disability, I think, again, we're looking at more of a felony rather than just maybe running into the store and leaving your dog in the hot car with the windows rolled up. And certainly,
but that's still considered.
It still could be considered a crime because a reasonable person would know that whether it's a child or a dog,
exactly.
You leave something in the car and it gets to be pretty hot in the car very quickly, that the animal could die.
And
so
Captain
I think
Fowler?
that's the cutting. I think that's sort of what we use to gauge.
So you're always constantly balancing, what your officers are looking at, and to see, is this an intentional crime of cruelty or abuse to an animal? Captain Fowler, how do you, look, your officers go out and you get a call that there's an animal left in a car? How do you proceed with something like that?
We go out and we look at the intent. Were they just running in? What the owner? Are they just running into the store? What's going on? Is there? We take other factors. How hot is it? Like today, it's very hot out. It's humid, and the temperatures in the cars rise really quick. We have to take that into consideration. And like Deputy Chief Tyler said, it could turn out to be criminal, and we would file charges with the state attorneys if it indicated that it was.
Well, one of the things, and I'd like you, Mr. Brodsky, and Ms. Whitmore to kind of comment on this, is an excellent brochure that's put out by the state attorney which kind of indicates what those signs of abuse and neglect are. And it's pretty extensive, Mr. Brodsky, and it's kind of complete as well. It's everything is from as simple as leaving an unattended animal chained outside to actually seeing signs of dog fighting type of thing. And I think lack of sanitation, lack of water, all of those things constitute what could be considered abuse, abandonment, or neglect. We go through this list if we can.
Well, and I think that's a good point. I mean, unfortunately, we see time and time again, and I think the panel here can talk about the kind of cases that we see time and time again, but a lot of these are folks that may intend well, have good intentions. They're running an errand, they're going to the mall, they want to bring their pet with them, and they think they're going to be in the store for just a few moments, and they don't think about the environment that they're leaving their animal in. They leave the car either with the windows all the way up because they think they're going to be inside for a few minutes, or they crack the windows just a few moments. And what they don't realize is they're gone longer than they believe that they're going to be in the store, and they cause the animal to suffer, or unfortunately sometimes we've seen recently where animals have died. So it's folks sometimes mean well and have good intentions, and unfortunately aren't thinking it through.
Right.
You know, they go out of town, they think that they're going to leave a sufficient amount of food and water, and they don't, and then bad things happen. So those are the kind of cases that unfortunately we're seeing time and time again. And then we have, on the opposite end, we have folks that fully well know that they're leaving their animal in a dire situation, and they don't seem to have much regard for the well-being of the animal. And so as they've indicated, I mean, we see the full spectrum of folks with good intentions and that just didn't think the situation very clearly through, and then folks that really don't have much regard either way.
Well, and one of the points that you made, and Ms. Whitmore, I want you to comment on, is that people who leave animals tethered or chained in yards, especially in Florida heat in the midst of summer, is just an untenable situation. How do you approach those type of things? Well, it's my dog, it's my yard, and things like that. But in actuality, that is against the law. Without sufficient water, sufficient sanitation. And those are critical things that people should be aware of.
Right. Well, and again, this is the whole purpose of this coalition, is to educate the public, because a lot of the stuff you're going to learn today, a lot of people don't realize it is against the law. For instance, the anti-tethering that you're just talking about, the tethering, that's against the law now in Manatee County, and it just got passed within about 6 months ago. And it came as a result of the community outcry going before the Animal Services Advisory Board and them recommending to institute this ordinance to the county. If you have a dog that's not, and you aren't with the dog and you're not within eyesight of the dog and it is tethered, it is against the law now in Manatee County. And Lisa can clarify that, but in the old days when I was young, I used to see people tie their dogs to the trees and go to work for the day. You can't do that anymore in Manatee County. And that is a result of the community outcry and the cases that unfortunately these people see. So that's one of the things that you've seen as a result of this organization. And our whole purpose is to get education to the community to let them know what you can and cannot do. And if you recognize something, you need to notify somebody so that we can take action and protect that animal.
So, Lisa, tell us about that tethering ordinance. That's got to be a kind of a critical thing, that people should know about, because you hear stories of dogs chained to car bumpers or the back of houses, and they can't move or they can't function well, and puts an animal in distress.
It will put an animal in distress, and as Commissioner Whitmore indicated, the Manatee County Commission did pass the ordinance, anti-tethering ordinance, and as Commissioner Whitmore pointed out, is that you have to be within eyesight. And even if the animal is on your own property, the tethering, that doesn't give you an exemption to this ordinance, and you could be subjected to a civil citation based on the tethering. The tethering also is cases we've seen are that tethering for extended periods of time cause the animal to lunge forward and to push up against the collar. And if that animal isn't released and given proper exercise and allowed to walk around, what will then occur? And I don't usually say a lot of definitive statements, but it will occur, is that collar will become now embedded into the neck, and it will continue to cut through the skin. So where there's the anti-tethering ordinance, it's now the consequences as a result of leaving a dog tethered for too long that then could subject you to the 828.12 criminal animal cruelty or neglect charge.
Well, let me just follow up with Chief Tyler and Captain Fowler. Does the city of Bradenton and the city of Palmetto, do they have that same kind of ordinance and a law that that anti-tethering is something that you can't tolerate?
Well, in the city of Palmetto, yes, we also adopted that ordinance. Basically, the city of Palmetto adopts all Manatee County animal regulations, and
In the city as well.
Yeah, And I think, people might say, well, isn't this a bit extreme? I love say in the case of a dog, I love my dog. I'm going to be out mowing the grass. I'm going to be in the front yard, in the backyard. I'm going to tether the dog in the backyard. The dog's got a bowl of water back there. Why should this apply to me? I think the reason that this came about is, even very innocently, that dog, depending on the dog's physical condition, the dog's size, that dog gets, runs around a tree a couple of times. So you've got the leash attached to, and now all of a sudden the leash is shorter and the dog can't get to the water bowl. And now you're tied up in the front yard for 45 minutes mowing the front yard and weeding and trimming and whatever, and you go back there and the dog is suffering from heat exhaustion or worse. So here's an example of I love my pet, and I didn't intend those consequences, but they happened. And I want to kind of go back and sort of emphasize something that Commissioner Whitmore talked about. We're not just focusing on enforcement and on making arrests here. The purpose of this coalition and the purpose of even this program here is to raise not only awareness in the community on, first of all, what am I doing in my own home and how am I interacting with my pet, but awareness on what's going on around me, my coworkers, my neighbors, things that I see as I drive every day. And it's also education. In fact, probably the awareness and the education piece is primarily what we're trying to accomplish here.
And I think, as Commissioner Whitmore pointed out, I mean, the broad base of the coalition that's kind of involved in this is really doing its very best to kind of educate this entire community. So, Ms. Brodsky, you had a comment?
Well, and I'd follow up on what Chief Fowler said. I mean, and I think that's a great point. At the end of the day, I think all of us would agree we don't want to be in the business of arresting anyone or prosecuting anyone. This is about making sure that that people are aware of the perils that animals can suffer, and these are all laws that are really designed to make them aware of these issues. And we just want, the goal here is community awareness, so that we can do everything together as a community, coming together to make sure that we look out for our own animals, and that we're looking out for the animals of our neighbors, of our friends, and those animals that we see around us, to make sure that they're happy and healthy as well.
And I think that's an excellent point. I mean, as you've pointed out, I'm sorry, Captain Fowler.
Well, I think we can all agree that education on this particular issue is what we want to get out there, that there are certain things that, even though people may have the best intentions, can go wrong, and we want to make sure that the public is educated on what some of the things that we look for.
And I think that's an excellent point. Hopefully, we're going to be able to continue this with perhaps bringing some, education components, to this community to see how they can better, not only care for their pet, but how they can be better informed about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Right.
And Ms. Chittaro, I want to go back to you for a moment. Obviously, some people will take their animal, put it in the car, they'll run to the store, and those are unintended type of things, and if something happens to that dog, it's most unfortunate. But there are elements of not only this community, but other communities, I'm sure, throughout the country, that purposely have facilities and breed dogs, for fighting. And everybody's aware of the Michael Vick story and how terrible and how tragic that was. Does Manatee County have that type of underground things? Because that's not only illegal. That's just a truly terrible situation to put any animal in.
The issue of dogfighting, and there is a statute that is on dogfighting, specifically that dogfighting is against the law. Dogfighting and the law enforcement would probably be able to answer that better than I would. But from the time that I've been in this position and focusing on the animal abuse and the fraud-related cases, has allowed me to be in the community and to get more information about what's going on directly from community members. What I have learned is that pit bulls are the choice for dogfighting, and Commissioner Whitmore has been to the shelter. I've been to the shelter, and our shelter here in Manatee County is full of pit bulls. So that is an indication that there is dog fighting that is occurring within Manatee County. There are also other signs of dog fighting. For a dog pit bull, for instance, to be ideal or to be someone want to use as a dog fighting dog, it's either going to be a bait dog, where the dog fighter group will use that dog as more submissive, and they will use that dog to use the more vicious ones to attack. The teeth will be filed down on the dogs, which goes down to the nerve that causes a dog to want to bite and to create aggression. There'll be heavy chains tied around its neck. There'll be toys attached to trees or to items, and it's to build up the neck muscles. And the pit bulls also, what's unique to them is that their jaws will lock when they bite. Which may be one of the reasons why they are the choice animal for dog fighting. But there has been some case law too where search warrants have been obtained and upheld by the courts, where jurisdictions and law enforcement, they use things like the satellite to look down onto a property, and it will be cage on top of cage on top of cage, next to each other, so that, in proper confinement, where they're all just put together, because these aren't pets, these are commodities. They're used to make money.
And true indicators of perhaps of some kind of criminal activity.
Yes, and as far as, and I'll let the officers answer, but it's also a very it's very well organized, and it's very underground, and it's very hard. I think that the officers will agree to investigate and to detect, and I'll let them respond to that.
Chief, have you seen any indicators in the city of Palmetto of dog fighting?
Absolutely, yeah. We know that we've had cases in the city and in the areas immediately adjoining the city. I think a lot of times people associate dog fighting and things like that with rural areas, but we know we have it, in the urban cores of Manatee County, Bradenton, Palmetto. One of the things that we've been working on for probably the past couple of years, and again, this is something where the coalition's been so important, is educating our officers and specifically what to look for. And in the city of Palmetto, we also educate, we work with our code enforcement officials on what to look for. Because the whole thing is, a lot of times we're going to, it's not like we're acting on a tip or we have a specific fact that we're investigating, but a lot of times it's going to be a chance occurrence or a chance meeting, or we happen to be at a location for another reason, and we start seeing some of the indicators of dog fighting, and of course that will generate a new investigation.
We've done several search warrants for narcotics in the city of Bradenton, and in some of those locations we've found indications where they're raising dogs for dog fighting. Granted, there may not be what you would think of as a ring of where they would put the dogs in the fight, but you have the cages, like Miss Chittaro mentioned, with the cages lined up, stacked up, the dogs tethered with heavy chains, the ropes hanging from the trees with their toys hanging on, so they could practice the biting and building up their neck strength and stuff like that. And we would get, we obviously now that we know what we're looking for, we get other agencies involved that can further help us with that portion of the investigation, because we can take it that way, other than just focusing on what we were there for the narcotics, because then it branches off into a total separate investigation.
I mean, that's an excellent point, I think. It's vigilance, it's good police work, it's kind of involving, different components of the government, such as code enforcement, to be observant for you. I mean, I think that's next. And I would think, in a city, in a county like Manatee County, which is considered very enlightened, to have that kind of activity, that kind of animal cruelty going on, is something that cannot and should not be tolerated. And I think we had a couple of people. We'll go to Commissioner Whitmore. You had a comment.
Well, on the comments previously made, we do have quarterly meetings with this group, but what you'd be surprised at is the others that attend. We have undercover from every law enforcement agency that you would never know that actually get in these neighborhoods. And just to hear the exchange of ideas and did you notice this area of town here, this is what we're seeing, and then everybody gets on board. And actually how I got involved with the whole no-kill movement, the saving of animals in Manatee County was, there was a pit bull in East Bradenton that his name was Chance. I think we all remember that. And they found him by Manatee Hospital, and somebody had just taken a pair of scissors to cut his ears short and taped his mouth with duct tape. And just to see that people have this in them to do this to these animals, I don't think anybody in Manatee County would wants this to happen. So this is such a great group, because what you don't see is behind the scenes with our law enforcement educating their staff. They're undercover. We're all working together to try to eradicate this, really, and punish the ones that deserve it.
And I think another incident that you were also involved with was the case of Axel, who was mutilated with an axe, and then made a complete and full recovery too. So those incidents do occur, and they're tragic when they do occur. But just how prevalent are we seeing them? Or is law enforcement need to be more vigilant? Does prosecution need to be more effective? How can we help educate a community to know that these things are not going to be tolerated? And Lisa, you had a comment.
I was just going to comment on the statute, the dog fighting statute. It's fairly lengthy, but I think what a lot of people don't know, and I didn't know this until I actually looked at the statute when I became involved in this division, is that to be charged or to be subjected to the criminal penalties of this statute, it really is just promoting, being involved, attending, or wagering. So it's any sort of participation. It doesn't mean that you've actually taken a dog or two dogs and created a fight, but just that you have promoted, or you've betted, made a wager, or participated. I mean, it is lengthy, but that's kind of the quick paraphrase of it.
So, and that's an excellent point. So if you're not there and you don't have a dog in the fight,
Correct.
But if you're sitting there betting on that thing, you can be held accountable.
Right, even if you're not there.
That's a really interesting point. But Mr. Brodsky, one of the clear things that that's come up as part of this conversation is to reach out to the community and get the community involved in how to prevent and just stop completely animal abuse and neglect. What would you say to the community to get them involved? Let's say that you're living in a neighborhood or in a development, and you know that there's someone down there who's abusing their animals or leaving their animals without proper sanitation or food or water. What would you encourage them to do?
And I think that's been a difficult situation for a lot of people, because oftentimes they're talking about a neighbor or a friend or a colleague, and that they know that their animal's perhaps not being cared for properly, and it's a very difficult situation for them, and I know that they're very uncomfortable. But it's so important that they make that effort, because this group here, law enforcement, we can't do this by ourselves. I mean, we're going to be vigilant. We're going to continue this fight to eradicate this problem, but we need the eyes and the ears of the community to help us and assist us. And so if they do have trepidation about calling, and they're anxious about calling and reporting something to about their neighbor, they can always report it anonymously. Right. 1-800-Crime Stoppers, and contacting our local Crime Stoppers numbers here in the community, and they can remain anonymous by calling law enforcement. But it's important that that message be shared or passed on to law enforcement or to Manatee County government, to Manatee County Animal Services. But we need to make sure that it's reported, and we can do everything that we can to protect their identity when they make the report. But it's the well-being of the animal that's most important.
And I think that's an excellent point. I mean, I think if you see something by the side of the road, like an abandoned animal, I don't think anybody hesitate to pick up a phone and say, I found it. Right. But if in your neighborhood you know that there's dogs that are being beaten or maltreated, then there might be some trepidation. And how would law enforcement, if you got a call from someone says, the guy down the street here is beating his dog with a stick, but I don't want to get involved. How would you pursue something like that?
Well, we give the same attention that we would if somebody called up and said, you know, this is Mr. and Mrs. Jones, and I live at 123 Main Street. We're going to, you know, follow up on that call just the same as we would any other call. Though because you don't want to leave your name and you want to remain anonymous, does not, you know, put that call down lower in the queue. So we're going to follow up on it.
And you know, if somebody calls and you would actually go to the area and look into that, and if you saw evidence or signs of that animal being abused, then you would follow up even further on that with, you know, possibly investigation.
Absolutely.
Documentation could lead to further investigation, you know, taking photographs, photograph evidence, physical evidence, whatever we could, you know, find and see to get probable cause to be able to, you know, get a search warrant through the state attorney's office. And just like Deputy Chief Tyler said, we would follow up as much as we could, and then move forward with the case.
You know, one thing I think that's important for the community to understand about animal abuse and neglect, but especially animal abuse, is first of all, a lot of times that animal abuse and especially dogfighting as a criminal enterprise, it's also tied to other criminal enterprises. These individuals are involved in many different types of crimes: drug trafficking, prostitution, extortion, any number of very, very serious crimes. And the other thing is there's a direct nexus between the abuse of animals and anger issues and actually persons crimes. We know that there's been some studies done where they interviewed victims at domestic violence shelters, right. And we're looking at 80–85% of those victims say that yes, the abuser's also abusing or maybe even killed the family pet. We know that especially early on with children, when they have a tendency to kill, abuse, or maim animals, a lot of times that's a precursor of something that's going on in that child's life. And that child is very likely to go on and now become a batterer or become somebody who's going to physically victimize the people in his or her life. So there's a real nexus here that we as a community certainly have a vested interest in being involved with.
It's an excellent point. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to follow up with that. I mean, that is an excellent point. I mean, that because of the fact that animal abuse has been detected and we know that it's going on, that is systemic, and the studies have repeatedly shown that child abuse, sexual abuse, physical abuse can be going on, instances of domestic violence. So when someone is intentionally, without any regard, hurting an animal, that should raise a red flag and should concern people that if an animal's being abused, there is a strong possibility that someone else is also being physically abused as well. And so for that reason, it's really important to make sure that the community lets us know that these things are going on, because there could be something else going on that we need to look into as well.
Okay, we'll go with Commissioner Whitmore, and then I think Mr. Chittaro has a comment as well.
I just want to thank Mr. Brodsky, because you've hit this entire conversation right on the head. That's why he's established this white-collar crime unit, and that's why Lisa has been very, very, very busy, because there has been a coalition, and she actually deals with elder abuse too because of that. And I'm so happy that actually he took this upon when he first got in office and took this and ran with it. So I'm very happy that he, you know, fulfilled his wishes and made an organization like this, or helps us start an organization like this. So I want to thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I think also it's very critical is that, you know, those that are the most vulnerable, the elderly, children, animals, are always the most that are victimized, or, you know, potential for victimization. And to have the state's attorney's office kind of focused on how best to help those most vulnerable, I think is really a great indicator of reaching out into this community. And Lisa, you had another comment.
Just in furtherance of these statistics, And when Mr. Brodsky and I discussed this division, and when Mr. Brodsky decided to create this division, that was what we knew of those statistics, that it's in the high 80s, that there's a direct correlation between animal abuse, animal cruelty, and someone's violence tendencies, and that's towards children, domestic violence, gang-related, drug-related. And from those statistics, and now after doing this for a year or 2 years, is where prior to Mr. Brodsky being state attorney and now with this division, is that there's been a very big spike in the cases that we have prosecuted through our office. I think last year our office prosecuted, I don't know the exact number, it's somewhere between 40 to 60 cases, misdemeanor and felony. And in each one of those cases, and the ones that I've prosecuted, the majority have been connected to domestic violence, to a search warrant for drugs where there was an animal being abused. And it's the dynamic and the mechanism which the stats have shown, and I've seen it in actual practical play by prosecuting these cases, is that in an issue, say for an example, domestic violence, is that control and fear is what's used by the perpetrator towards the family pet. Now, the family pet is one of the more vulnerable members of our society, like the elderly and children. They're not going to fight back. It's your family pet. And so that's what's used to control and to create fear in the victim in a domestic violence situation.
Well, and I think, that's the true indicator, as, both Captain Fowler and Scott and Mr. Brodsky have mentioned, this is just maybe the tip of the iceberg. If somebody's, beating their pet or, malnourishing their pet, what else is, in the background, that can be indicators. I want to spend a few minutes, if I may, Mr. Brodsky and Ms. Whitmore, talking specifically about the coalition and the team of people that you have working with you to kind of create this greater sense of awareness about abuse, abandonment, and neglect. And as you mentioned at the very beginning, Commissioner Whitmore, you have a great team. You've got law enforcement, you've got animal service providers doing that. Why is it important to have this team of people kind of come together to work towards this?
I think it's so you can help prosecute the abusers. And I think before, and I'm sure the law enforcement and Lisa and Mr. Brodsky can confirm that, if you don't have a coordinated effort, I mean, we learned so much in those meetings, like somebody will say, well, you could tell the person you're going to videotape them when you're searching, and just stuff like this that the officers go, oh, that's a good idea. I mean, just to bring the team together to be able to actually have a successful prosecution if in fact they are really abusing an animal. And so I think that's really, really helped, and we're working better as a team, and I'm very happy that it's finally come to fruition. We're doing a good job, I think.
Well, I would think having law enforcement is one component of this coalition, but then you have all these animal service providers like Bishop and Canine Castaways and the Animal Network working together, so they can not only become eyes and ears as well, but they also have potential solutions and pathways that can help you towards educating the public.
There was such a disconnect before the coalition was created, and to be able to bring so many of the stakeholders to the table where we can all hear each other, listen to each other, and express our ideas and our thoughts, I think meant a world of a difference in all the valuable contributions that we were able to bring to this program. To me, the analogy is it's like a football team. If your goal is to get into the end zone, score a touchdown, but if you were to say, look, we're not gonna huddle and we're not gonna discuss the play, that's you're not going to do very well. It's by being able to huddle together, talk about the play, and talk about what you're going to execute to score that touchdown. And in this case, it's the coalition has been able to get together and bring people from the law enforcement community, the Bradenton Police Department, the Palmetto Police Department, Manatee County government, which has been just phenomenal stakeholder in this, the state attorney's office, and like you said, these other organizations from veterinary care to the shelters, and to bring everybody together, because we all have we each have our own unique perspective, and we see things from different sides of the coin. And so being able to bring all that together has meant so much.
And Captain Fowler, you had a comment?
Yeah, knowledge and the experience that the coalition brings together is very helpful, especially with the state attorney's office. Case law changes every day, and there's stuff that's different cases that are added that we may not have had to look at to be able to apply to specific cases, and that's one big thing that they bring to the coalition, and that we can get out to the officers, because it may add something else that we can look for to bring these cases forward.
And I would think from a law enforcement perspective, and correct me if I'm wrong, that to have the state attorney's involvement in saying, like, this is what you need to look for in an investigation. This is the policy or procedures in statute. That we can go for a conviction. From a law enforcement perspective, that's got to be pretty helpful.
It is. It is.
Absolutely.
Ms. Chittaro?
I don't know football, so I'll use a hockey analogy.
You might notice her Tampa Bay Lightning.
Yes.
And we're going to talk about that now that she's brought it up.
Yeah, Ms. Brodsky was talking about football, but I don't know. I know there's a lot of players on the field at one time, which I don't understand. So for that point, I'll stick with hockey. The coalition is a team effort like hockey is. There's an offense, there's a defense, there's a goalie, and the idea is to keep the puck out of the net. And I think maybe it's the same for football.
That's true. You keep
ball
the ball out of the net. You'll have to go to one of these Tampa Bay Buccaneer games one time.
I think I'm just going to stick with hockey. Football looks a little too complicated with me. But with the coalition, what we have found, and especially bringing in addition to law enforcement, the commissioners, county commissioners, the rescues, shelters, and veterinarians, is that we all work together. And what we do that way is we do a lot more prevention. We learn from each other. We maximize our resources, and then more efficiently are able to investigate and prosecute these cases. And I have noticed from prosecuting them that the rate and the frankly, the speed that we're able to do it, and the quality-wise as well, is there because we have this coalition in place of experts in many different areas, and with those roles combined, it actually makes my job a lot easier. And as prevention was brought up, and that is one of the areas that we are focusing on, and obviously one of the reasons for these panels is that we want to get the word out and prevent it, is that we may be one of the few organizations that we don't try to beef up business, that we would prefer not to have the business.
And that's an excellent point. And I would suggest to you, too, that the strength of this coalition is that you kind of augment and enhance one another's different perspective. From the state's attorney, you kind of enhance the law enforcement perspective. And I think from the animal services providers, too, is to know that you have the full weight and strength of the state attorney and law enforcement working with you to help prevent things. I do want to take a moment now to talk about a really great initiative that this coalition has put together, and we're going to defer to Ms. Chittaro because she brought it up first, is that the partnership that you've kind of began, and I think Mr. Brodsky mentioned it, with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And tell us why that's important and what you're doing with Tampa Bay Lightning.
With the Tampa Bay Lightning, for one, I'm obviously, as I just mentioned, I'm a big Tampa Bay Lightning hockey fan. The CEO, Todd Lewalke, was a judge at Canine Christmas a few years ago. And also what he did is he put in as a silent auction a raffle off a VIP package to the hockey game, and I wanted to make sure I won it because I wanted to go to the game. But from that, and Commissioner Whitmore knows Mr. Lewalke very well, is that we've been having a continual conversation. And when I did go to that hockey game and speaking with the hockey players, I actually wanted to talk about the game. And the players themselves were actually very interested in what we were doing regarding animal abuse, that they did seem very interested in animal abuse and animal cruelty and how to prevent it. So that was the reason for discussing a partnership, a community partnership with the Tampa Bay Lightning for that, to help raise the awareness.
That's very exciting to have, a great sports franchise like the Lightning, wanting to participate and work with you to create a sense of awareness. So you've undertaken a couple of initiatives with the Lightning to kind of help with them assisting you in what capacity?
Well, I think Mr. Brodsky can answer that better. He's
Well, I mean, and Commissioner Whitmore and Lisa both have been tremendously helpful in that, and in establishing that partnership with the Tampa Bay Lightning and Mr. Lewicki. And so, we've recently met, and obviously we've met with Manatee Educational TV, and we've agreed to do some public safety announcements. And I think that that's going to help us go further and do what we can to further educate and raise awareness in the community.
And I think that's a great thing to have, like a professional sports team like the Lightning, wanting to participate and wanting to become involved in your efforts to create a greater sense of awareness against animal abuse and abandonment, neglect, and it's really good. So you're going to be on skates at some point during?
I don't think any of us skate.
Stay tuned.
Well, we're kind of winding down a little bit, and I want to go around the table and get some final comments. I think this has been a very valuable program for the public to understand the full impact of from the state's attorney's office, from Manatee County government, from law enforcement, and how animal abuse, abandonment, and neglect can be brought to the forefront and hopefully eliminated. And I want to go around the table. And Captain Fowler, I'm going to start with you, sir. And what do you want this community to know what law enforcement is going to be doing to help prevent abuse, abandonment, neglect?
We're going to try and help educate the community and our officers as they're going through their career in law enforcement for the signs of animal abuse and make them aware of what it could lead to, the nexus to other types of crimes, and just make sure that when they see these signs that they act on them and take the appropriate action. And a better communication between the law enforcement agencies and the coalition to keep this program going and stop animal abuse as we know it.
Chief Tyler, what would you like the community to know? What about your efforts that you're accomplishing?
Well, I'd echo what Captain Fowler said. Chief Wells and I were very excited when the idea of the coalition came up and when we formed the coalition. And we've talked about how important this is because of everything at stake, not just the issue of animal abuse and neglect, but everything that goes along with it. And I'd like to say that even though the coalition's only been in existence a short time, a year or two, I think, I believe it's working. And I'll tell you, I guess, from a scientific point of view, previous to the coalition and previous to our efforts to educate our officers and get code enforcement on board, we were only dealing with a handful of animal abuse and neglect cases a year. We weren't getting a lot of calls from the community about concerns or suspected animal abuse. The past year or two, we've seen that explode. We're dealing with many more criminal cases, and we're also taking a lot more calls from the community about, hey, can you just go out and check out on this? And so many of these calls are nothing more than educating the homeowner or getting the homeowner some resources, or the pet owner some resources that basically enrich their life and the pet's life. But I believe it's working. That education, that awareness piece is definitely working.
Well, that's great news. Ms. Chittaro, you are really the tip of the spear. You're the one who are going to be looking at these cases of abuse and abandonment, neglect. This coalition has made a tremendous impact, as Chief Tyler just mentioned. What do you want the community to know from your perspective about abuse, abandonment, and neglect?
Just what I've gone through on what the laws are, the improper confinement, the neglect, the abuse, what dog fighting really is that if you do suspect, and these pamphlets, they're available throughout Manatee County, or through my office. You can always call my office and we'll mail them out. They're also online on the State Attorney Facebook page that you can see this actually online. It does give information, tips, and signs of abuse, and if you suspect it, we'd like you to report it as soon as possible.
That's good news. Ms. Whitmore, as a county commissioner, you've been actively involved in animal protection for many, many, many years. You've done a lot of great work towards this community of trying to get that information out there. What do you want the community to know about abuse, abandonment, and neglect?
Well, as a policy setter of Manatee County, my job is to make sure that Animal Services has everything they need to be able to work with this group to be able to assist in prosecuting these abusers. And Manatee County is not going to tolerate anybody abusing an animal, period. And with the help of this team, we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. Now, there are incidents where things happen that it wasn't intentional, and that's up to the law enforcement and our judicial system to fill that out. But we want the public to be comfortable to report this, because Manatee County is a caring community. We care about our people and we care about our animals. And we've set an example all over the United States, Manatee County has, on how we care about animals in Manatee County. So this is just another leg of that, to continue this mission, to make sure that everybody in this county knows that we aren't going to tolerate anybody abusing any animal. And with the help of this group, I'm so proud to be a part of it, and I'm glad that they invited me.
Thank you. And Mr. Brodsky, before we ask for your final comment, I must say that with the implementation of your white-collar animal abuse thing, it was really an innovative initiative that you undertook, because as we mentioned before, crimes against the elderly, crimes against animals, it's always the most vulnerable people that are victimized. And so I would say to you that this division is really doing a great work and kind of highlighting those cases where people and animals are being taken advantage of. And I would suggest to you that if we wanted to, we would love to do a program on elderly abuse, perhaps down the road, and that those ideas and initiatives that you're doing to help protect the elderly, which in Manatee County we have a great population.
Sure, that'd be great.
But on animal abuse and the coalition itself, and you're working with law enforcement and the great staff that you have, what do you want this community to know about, from your perspective, about abuse, abandonment, and neglect?
Well, a phrase that we kind of coined doing this kind of work, and after we created this unit, is we really feel that this is giving a voice to the voiceless. And that's really meant a lot to me, because I truly feel that this organization and our efforts are bringing a voice to the voiceless, to these animals that are being hurt. And what folks should understand about this group is that we care very much. We care very passionately about the animals in our community, and we know that they do. We know that this community loves its animals. And so we just want to join them, work alongside with them, and make them aware of these issues that we're seeing come across our desk, that are being received as law enforcement calls for investigation to these police agencies, and unfortunately cases that are coming across our desk, and just to raise awareness so that these cases don't come in. This is about awareness, this is about education for us, and as Lisa said, we really would be very happy if we didn't have to prosecute at all. I'd rather that we didn't have to do that. And that folks know how important it is to report. If they believe an animal is being abused or abandoned or neglected, we want to make sure that they feel comfortable to report that and let the authorities look into that for them.
Thank you, Mr. Brodsky, and thank you for your efforts in putting all of this coalition together and for the initiative of doing the white-collar and animal abuse division. I think it's going to make has made a tremendous impact. Unfortunately, we're kind of out of time for today, and I just want to go around and thank Captain Fowler, Chief Tyler, Ms. Chittaro, Commissioner Whitmore, Mr. Brodsky for taking the time, what I know is a very busy schedule, to participate in this discussion. Now, we're going to put some numbers up at the end of this program of where people can report, from the Sheriff's Office to the Palmetto Police Department to different animal service providers, that if they feel or suspect or need some additional information, we're going to have those numbers up at the end of the program. But I want to thank you again for taking the time to do this, and would welcome you back at a future time perhaps to say how the coalition is working, what are the strides that you've made so far, and what are the next steps. And I think that this is a critical thing for this community to talk specifically about abuse and abandonment and neglect, and the efforts being made at the very top echelons of the state's attorney's office to law enforcement to Manatee County government to make a difference in this community. Thank you for joining us on this special report on METV. If you'd like to find out information about how you can report animal abuse, abandonment, and neglect, watch the numbers at the end of this program. And if you have any idea of wanting to report, please jot those numbers down, because the law enforcement wants to know, the state's attorney wants to know how you can get involved. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time on METV.